This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Oteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Just an hour to go before polls close, millions of South Koreans turn out in force to vote in a snap election, hoping to restore stability after former President Yoon's impeachment. Now, Mongolia's prime minister steps down after a no-confidence vote amid corruption claims that sparked protests. He'll stay on as caretaker until a new leader is named within 30 days. And a Chinese national is in custody over the killing of 2 Japanese men in Dalian City after a business deal turned sour. And China's factory activity in May shrinking for the first time in 8 months, a sign that U.S. tariffs are now starting to hit the manufacturing superpower. Also in East Asia tonight, we look at how robots will shape our future and which superpower will likely come up tops in the development of advanced humanoids. South Korea is in the final hour of voting for the next president before polls close at 8 p.m. local time. Well, the winner of the election faces an uphill struggle after months of political turmoil sparked by former President Yoon Suk-yeol's disastrous martial law attempt. Now, voter turnout is high. Officials say 73.9% of the electorate had cast their votes as of 5 p.m. local time, and more than a third of the 44 million eligible voters participated in the pre-elections. Now, frontrunner in the race is Liberal candidate Lee Jae-myung. He has pledged to reform the constitution after Mr. Yoon's failed martial caused political chaos, and he has also promised strengthened foreign ties and boost the economy. While trailing behind Mr. E is Conservative Kim Woon-soo, while the People Power Party candidate backs the ousted president's approach towards North Korea, proposing stronger defense against Pyongyang. And he also seeks to resolve concerns on tariffs imposed by the U.S. and expand incentives for companies investing in South Korea. Now, other candidates running in the elections are Lee Jun-suk, Kwon Young-kuk, and Song Jin-ho. Well, the elections follow a period of high drama in South Korean politics. Former President Yoon was removed from office in April after he imposed martial law in December. Crowds have rallied for the past 6 months, denouncing the former president's actions. Now, the winning candidate will be inaugurated immediately after election results have been certified. And for more on this, we are joined by CNA's Lim Yoon-suk, and she is at Kwangwon-woon Square in Seoul. Yoon-suk, first up, what exactly are South Korean voters looking for in their new president against this backdrop of snap poll?
Well, yes, I am here in Kwangwon Plaza, where you can see it's full of people. There are tourists and also locals, too, because it is a public holiday here in South Korea. And also, according to the latest data out, as of 7 p.m. local time, some 77.7% of voters have voted, and that is the highest turnout in South Korean history. And so the high turnout here does show how much Koreans really want a leader here in South Korea. And, you know, in about 1 hour's time from now, at about 8 p.m., when the polling stations close, the exit polls will be released. And these are exit polls conducted by South Korea's 3 major broadcasters, SBS, KBS, and NBC. And those exit polls in the past have proven to be correct. And that's why many South Koreans will be watching the exit polls to get a clear direction as to who will become South Korea's next president. For example, in 2022, the exit polls then predicted that Yoon Suk-yeol would win by a very small margin, and he did. And so, you know, the exit polls are a very good indicator here of who will be leading South Korea in the next 5 years. And that's why Koreans here are expected to gather. And in fact, there are preparations underway in different parts of Kwangwon now to have Koreans gather and get together to watch the election counting, which will start as soon as the polling booths closes at 8 p.m. Now, earlier, I did speak to some of the Koreans, and I did ask them what was on their minds when they went to cast their votes. And let's listen to what some of them said earlier to CNA.
국가와 민족을 위해서 일할 수 있는 사람 생각하면서 찍었습니다. 근데 잘하려고 했던 게 잘못 가가지고 이런 대선 결과까지 빚어졌으니까.
중요하게 생각하는 거는 균형 있는 사회가 되는 게 좋은 것 같습니다. 그래서 뭐 너무 치우쳐지지 않고 그 양쪽 다 의견을 좀 잘 들어줄 수 있는 그런 사회가 되는 게 중요할 것 같습니다.
화합, 공생, 같이 이해해주는 폭을 넓혔으면 좋겠다. 혼자 사는 사회가 아니고 더불어 같이 사는 사회로 갔으면 좋겠다라는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
And as you heard there, it was really about uniting the country because the country has been divided since that martial law declaration. But in general, I think, speaking to a lot of the Koreans here who did cast their votes, I think it's really where they do want to see stability, credibility in their new leader, and they really want a fresh start following those months of political turmoil here in South Korea.
Well, Yoon, so lots of issues and challenges that the elected president must immediately address as the country emerges from a political crisis. Can you just walk us through some of those?
Well, yes, there will be lots of challenges for whoever becomes the new president because from the very start, the new president will have to go into office immediately. Now, usually a president-elect will have this 2-month period of making preparations to enter the presidential office, being briefed by government officials or by presidential office officials to get ready to go into the presidential office. But because this is a snap election, the newly elected president won't have that leisure, that luxury. And so as soon as the election commission here announces the winner, the winner will start his official duties. There'll be a small, simple inauguration ceremony in Parliament on Wednesday. And then after that, that president will have to go into Yongsan presidential office right away and start his official duties. Now, there will be many challenges for the new president. Most of all, we have the import tariffs, the tariffs imposed on South Korea. So it will be important to try and resolve that, though we have heard from the candidate Lee Jae-myung saying that he didn't think it was very important for South Korea to rush into negotiations. And so it is very possible that he won't go into talks with the U.S. President Donald Trump right away, as he has said that it was important to have South Korea's interests first, whether it's issues related to defense or the economy. On the other hand, the ruling party candidate Kim Moon-soo has said that he would hold talks with U.S. President Donald Trump as soon as he is elected president, and he says that it is important to reaffirm this close alliance between Washington and Seoul, whether it's issues related to defense or the economy. Now, apart from that, North Korea is, still a threat to South Korea, and there have been rising concerns here in South Korea about North Korea upgrading its nuclear and missile capabilities, especially after deploying troops to Russia in the Ukraine war and that close cooperation that we've seen between Pyongyang and Moscow. And so that is an issue that has to be resolved. We know that the ruling party candidate Kim Moon-soo is expected to take a conservative, hardline approach when dealing with North Korea, although with Lee Jae-myung, it is possible that he will be taking more of a lesser hardline approach, more of this engagement policy, as he believes that it is important to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table. He has also said that it was important to maintain close ties with China and also Russia too, and that he would seek their help in also resolving not just the economic issues, but also issues related to peace here on the Korean Peninsula. So lots of challenges, but also here on the domestic front, there are challenges where, issues like housing, job insecurity, inequality, those are issues that both candidates have said that they will work for, they will work towards during their campaign pledges. And so I think those are issues that they will be tackling too. And so, lots of challenges, but I think a lot of South Koreans here will be looking for the new leader to be resolving these issues now that they do have a president after nearly 6 months of having no president.
Well, sounds like new president will have a lot on his plate. Well, thanks so very much for that report. CNA's Lim Yoon-suk live from Gwanghwamu Square in Seoul. Well, it is still hours before we find out who will become South Korea's next president. Now, leading up to the results, my trusty colleague Grace Shin joins me in the studio now to analyze and elaborate for us. Well, since all that whole fiasco, right, the martial law decree in December, it feels like this is a wake-up call for South Koreans, even those who are disinterested in politics, would you say?
Exactly. And today I would like to focus on the youth electorate because they are a very big part of the voters that are in for South Korea's elections. And this time around, before we start, we should take a look at the record number of voter turnout, as Hyun-suk mentioned. Not only in the early voting, we saw a record amount of 34.7%, but at 7 p.m., we saw over 77%. That's higher than the amount that we saw at the same time for the last election back in 2022. And while final turnout is still unknown, experts and locals agree that the botched but brief martial law and the ousting of President Yoon Suk-yeol marked a clear turning point in South Korea's politics. It pushed many, as you mentioned, even those that are previously disengaged to follow politics, to actually look at the news or participate in rallies or look through social media as to what's happening in South Korea. What's especially striking is the political awakening among South Korean youth, especially those aged 18 to 39. Despite years of being seen as politically apathetic and underrepresented in parliament, please note that only 3.7% of lawmakers under 40 compared to a global average of nearly 19% in South Korea. And these recent surveys show that though South Korean youth may seem politically apathetic, they're actually not, because recently the National Election Commission and Gallup found that 77% of young voters in their 20s intended to vote this election. That is up from 73.8%. And we're also seeing around 20,000 group of 18-year-olds eligible to make their first vote. So combined voters aged 18 to 39 make up around 30% of the voters this time around, which shows a powerful youth engagement in shaping the country's future.
So you've mentioned a third are in their 20s and 30s, going to the polls. So how have the candidates been wooing this key demographic?
Well, candidates have been trying to woo the youth from day one. As you can see in their presidential debates, they've used youth-friendly formats. They've tried to introduce their policies through what-if scenarios, like a popular game among Korean youth. They also referred to the popular MBTI personality test, introducing what their personality was like and how that would unfold in South Korean politics. They also highlighted their tech skills, AI knowledge, and boosted digital engagement through social media, all of which they thought would be important to try to target the young generation. Now, Lee Jae-myung from the Democratic Party emphasized youth future savings, where the government would match the monthly savings of up to around $100. He also promised unemployment benefits for those who voluntarily left jobs to seek new employment. Now, he also talked about covering the first premium payment for the national pension that has always been a rift between the younger and older generation. Kim Moon-soo from the People Power Party prioritized job creation by cutting down corporate regulations and reforming hire laws. He also tried to propose a youth marriage 333 program to ease housing costs for newlyweds, which directly involves the livelihoods of younger Koreans. As you can see, South Korea has one of the lowest birth rates and marriage rates in the world, and that's why this candidate tried to propose this. Lee Jun-suk from the New Reform Party, he is the youngest candidate, aged 40. He proposed reforming the national pension system as well to ensure fairness. He also planned to introduce a Strong Start Fund loan, which would offer up to $38,500 at a fixed 1.7% interest rates. So you can see that all of these candidates had a lot of youth-related policies for their pledges. And an expert I spoke with emphasized that Korean politicians are now understanding, and they must understand, that to win an election, swaying the younger voters that take up a third of the electorate is key. But how? Unlike the 586 generation, which refers to those born in the 60s who came to age of going to university in the 80s, and were under martial law and authoritarian rule, have witnessed student protests, violently suppressed, tend to have strong party loyalties shaped by their historical trauma, contrary to the younger generation that often show less ideological reality. So before we move on, let's take a listen to what this expert had to say in regard to South Korean youth's political color.
저는 이제 586이라고 하는 세대인데, 586 세대들은 전두환 정권에서 투쟁을 하면서 살아왔던 세대들이고요. 그래서 사실은 진보는 선이고 보수는 악이다라는 생각들을 많이 갖고 있어요. 하지만 젊은 세대들은 그런 경험이 없기 때문에 이념을 중심으로 선과 악을 나누질 않아요. 그러니까 나의 이익을 중심으로 하는데 이 문재인 정권 경험하면서 야, 이거 진본이건 안 되겠다라는 생각을 확실히 갖게 된 거죠.
So, as you've mentioned, those youth-related policies that the candidates were trying to woo younger voters, how much of that actually sits well with them? And also, what type of politics are the younger people trying to push for?
I think, as the expert noted, the younger generation especially values having their own house, and they want a stable job, especially since they view Korean society as one that's hard to plan out a steady and stable future. That being said, it's also worth noting how the younger generation is shaping South Korea's political activity. If you recall the demonstrations over the past 6 months, we saw K-pop music blaring on the streets, and instead of pickets, we saw candlesticks and light sticks that made the rallies seem more like concerts rather than traditional political protests. So it really encompasses how this younger generation in Korea is redefining political engagement. And they're not just joining marches, but they're also engaging through smartphones because they are the thumb generation, the digital generation, and they're also using AI. So many are now creators making and sharing political content or commentary on various social media platforms. And AI is playing a very big role in this election. Digital native voters have been using tools to compare politics and then share these articles or content with their friends to have a better understanding of who the candidates are and what their policies are. And on election day, what was also worth noting was that on social media, we saw a lot of posts of young voters proudly showing off their stamped ballots. And often it's like called personalized vote certificates because they would either print out their favorite K-pop artist or cartoon and then have these stamps that show that they actually exercise their right to vote. And I actually spoke with a young Korean voter living in Singapore who cast his ballot overseas for the first time. And he said that he definitely reached out to social media and AI tools to understand what this election was about and what he had to know. But more than anything, he noted that the recent political upheaval from the brief martial law decree to the snap election was definitely a wake-up call, and it pushed him, like many others, to stay engaged and informed. So let's take a listen.
This was a unique experience to actually vote away from home. But I think the reason why I did this was, I think it stems from like a sense of responsibility. With AI technologies, you're able to really crunch down those hard concepts, those policies into bite sizes. So the younger generation, especially with social media as well, they are well informed. They have the means to access these tools to be informed about the policies, to informed about the political strategies or political parties or the political candidates.
And it's also first time voting for you overseas, right?
It was my first time.
Well, thank you so very much for your analysis. Always appreciated. CNA's Grace Shin there.
Thank you.
Now, we'll also be getting more insights from political analyst Lee Sung-yoon later this hour on East Asia Tonight. A time now for a break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, the U.S. looking to complete trade negotiations to bring down its reciprocal tariffs. The White House asking countries to give them their best offer by tomorrow. And China's logistics sector growing steadily in the first 4 months of this year, despite global economic uncertainty. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and it is now time for your business update with Roland Lim. So, Roland, there are signs that the White House is apparently eager to sew up tariff talks with its trading partners.
You heard right, Oteli. Donald Trump's 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs will end next month. The White House reportedly wants countries to give them their best offer on trade negotiations by tomorrow. Now, that's according to a draft letter seen by Reuters, but it's not clear which countries would receive the letter.
The draft from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative is a glimpse at how President Donald Trump plans to bring tricky negotiations with dozens of countries to a close. Those talks kicked off in early April when Trump paused his Liberation Day tariffs for 90 days until July 8th, after the levy sent markets into a revolt. The draft letter also suggests an urgency within the administration to complete deals against its own tight deadline, now 5 weeks out. Officials have repeatedly promised that several agreements were nearing completion. However, Britain is the only major U.S. trading partner to have reached an agreement. Even that was closer to a framework for ongoing talks than a final deal. Over the weekend, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said on Fox News Channel's special report that some big deals were almost ready.
There are a couple of very large deals that are close. A couple of them are more complicated. And as we saw with the president's threat of 50% tariffs last Friday, the EU came to the table very quickly over the weekend. So now we've got the EU in motion also.
In the draft Reuters saw, the U.S. is asking countries to list their best proposals in a number of key areas, including tariff and quota offers for purchase of U.S. industrial and agricultural products, as well as plans to amend any non-tariff barriers. The letter states that the U.S. will evaluate the responses within days and offer a, quote, possible landing zone that could include a reciprocal tariff rate. It was unclear which countries would receive the letter, but it was directed at those with active negotiations. Washington has been engaged in such talks with the European Union, Japan, Vietnam, and India, among others. A USTR official said trade talks were ongoing at a, quote, rapid pace, and that it was in the best interest of all parties to, quote, take stock of progress and assess any next steps.
The global trade war looks like it may have taken a bite out of China's economy after factory activity shrank in May. The Caixin manufacturing PMI contracted for the first time in 8 months, and this marks the lowest reading in more than 2.5 years. It follows official PMI numbers released on Saturday that showed that China's manufacturing sector contracted. The weak PMI data will likely reinforce calls for stronger stimulus to prop up the world's second largest economy. And traders will be keeping watch to see if policymakers move to roll out additional measures. They are also monitoring comments from both Washington and Beijing on the state of the trade truce announced last month, amid reports that President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping will speak soon. Investors in Greater China turning positive on the likely talks between the U.S. and Chinese presidents. Yesterday, Beijing accused Washington of violating its trade truce. And this was in response to President Trump's claim that China breached a trade agreement signed in Geneva last month. The Shanghai Composite, back from a long weekend, it ended up 0.43%. Shenzhen, the second, was up 0.17%. Hang Seng Index at its highest level in 10 weeks, 1.5% in the green. And automakers were leading the bounce back, taking a breather from the recent sell-off triggered by a price war on the mainland. The Hang Seng Automobile Index jumping 2.4%. Li Autos leading the charge, 5.8% higher. BYD nearly 4% in the green. China's logistics industry is on the move and showing strong resilience. Despite global economic headwinds, the sector saw solid growth in the first 4 months of the year. A total social logistics hitting $16 trillion from January to April. That's a 5.6% year-on-year rise. The rise reflects steady recovery in both production and consumption demand, backed by stronger support for domestic logistics. And the growth was widespread. Nearly 88% of major industrial sectors saw growth in logistics demand, leading the way equipment manufacturing and high-tech industries, each logging a robust 10% jump. Consumer-driven logistics also gained pace, up nearly 6% from January to April, driven by policy support and emerging growth engines. A trade in schemes and live stream e-commerce also gave the extra push. Online retail remains strong, with logistics for physical goods rising 5.8% on year. And that'll do it for business. Telly.
Thanks so very much for that, Roland. Well, coming up next on East Asia tonight, South Korea is voting for their next president today, 6 months after ousted leader Yoon Suk-yeol triggered political turmoil with his martial law declaration. And we'll be getting more insights when we speak with political analyst Lee Sung-yoon in just a moment. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we've been following. South Koreans are voting to determine the next president, with polling stations set to close in half an hour at 8 p.m. local time. whoever is elected will face the arduous task of calming a polarized political landscape. Now, Mongolia's prime minister has resigned after he lost a confidence vote among lawmakers. The vote follows days of protests in the country's capital, calling for the prime minister to step down and accusing him of corruption. And the China Caixin manufacturing PMI in May shrunk at its fastest pace since September 2022. The figure of 48.3 is a sharp drop from April and comes at a time of prohibitive U.S. tariffs. For more insights into our top story, South Korea's presidential election, let's bring in political analyst Lee Sung-yoon. He is speaking to us from Seoul. So, Mr. Lee, thanks for joining us this evening. Let's just talk through about the current state of democracy. Well, it's been 6 months since, South Koreans took to the streets to protest against President Yoon's attempt at martial law. How do you think this election reflects the state of democracy and public trust in the country right now?
Well, that very unfortunate martial law declaration last December was a major, colossal blunder for President Yoon and his administration. So understandably, people took umbrage, as you mentioned. Many, many people took to the streets. But gradually, Yoon's ratings kept creeping up throughout the month of January and February and March. So when Yoon was officially dismissed by the Constitutional Court in early April, those against dismissal, removal from office, were about in the 45% range. So the nation is bitterly polarized. It's always been polarized, one could say, but I've never seen this kind of polarization. So the very arduous task for the next leader is how to mitigate this kind of bitterness pervasive through the land.
This snap election clearly triggered by, this extraordinary crisis, unprecedented almost. How much, the front-running candidate, Lee Jae-myung, how much of his lead do you think can be attributed to the public backlash against Yoon Suk-yeol rather than support for his actual policies that, he's been campaigning for?
Well, I don't want to undermine Mr. Lee's credentials or legitimacy. He ran against Yoon in the previous election in 2022, and Mr. Lee lost by a razor margin, 0.7 percentage points. So he's a successful politician, but as you suggest, yes, the backlash against martial law has certainly helped the Democratic Party of Korea, of which Mr. Lee is the leader. So he is the front runner, has been for many years, and according to many, many polls, in the days leading up to about a week ago, when South Korea implements 6 days of election silence, it's illegal to publicize new opinion polls during those days. Mr. Lee was very comfortably ahead of the main other candidate running, Mr. Kim Moon-soo. So Mr. Lee, I assume, will be the next leader.
So polls are closing in about half an hour's time and results will be expected shortly after. I'm curious to know, Mr. Lee, what sort of key indicators or trends will you be looking out for in order to better understand the wider political and social implications of this election?
Well, real politics is sometimes stranger than fiction. And we've seen, this is sort of deja vu all over again. In 2017, the sitting South Korean president was dismissed, removed from office by the Constitutional Court after having been impeached. That was President Park. But what's different is in those days, the vast majority of the South Korean population supported her removal from office, almost 80% of South Koreans. But today, it's about 6-4 or 5.5 to 4.5. So this kind of polarization will not subside anytime soon. And then there are all sorts of issues on foreign policy, the economy. South Korea's economy is expected to grow by less than 1% this year. So that's, of course, a priority for the new administration. And then there are very delicate relationships to manage with Japan, with China, with the United States, North Korea, and so forth. So whoever is elected takes office less than 24 hours from now, tomorrow morning, most likely, will have a full plate.
So, which president do you think China and the U.S. would prefer to work with as South Korea prepares for this leadership change? Does it even matter?
Well, in South Korean politics, there are people who are very, very pro-US, people who are much more lukewarm, people who are very pro-China, people who are anti-China, and so on, with respect to Japan and North Korea and some other countries. So Mr. Lee's camp traditionally is much more sanguine about China, more resistant to Japan, hostile towards Japan for its 35 years of brutal occupation in the early 20th century, and then more accommodating of North Korea, and basically pro-US, but a little more ambivalent. So I expect people, powerful people in the councils of power sitting in Washington, D.C., or Beijing, or Tokyo, or even Kyiv in Ukraine, to have very different views and expectations. Mr. Lee is, again, a seasoned veteran politician. He's very smooth, but he has said some things in the past on foreign policy that have raised eyebrows, like trilateral military drills among the US, Japan, and South Korea is extremely pro-Japanese and a defense disaster, and many other unfortunate statements like that. So people are watching intently, I assume.
Right. And we talked about, the new president having a lot on his plate, a whole bunch of challenges that he has to deal with. But what do you think is the first thing the elected president will tackle, when he takes on, when he starts helming the country?
Well, every president, every person running for the presidency, they prioritize the economy, of course, as they should. But in the past, every single new administration in power has gone after their adversaries from the past. So the Moon administration from 2017 to 2022 imprisoned some 200 former officials of the previous administration. And we've seen this kind of political purge happen over and over again. Mr. Lee has actually proclaimed that he will go after, with all legal means in his possession, the forces of the insurrection, referring to people who were pro-martial law and who were somewhat lukewarm against President Yoon instead of slamming him. So we will see a period of internal bitter politics within South Korean politics.
Well, this turnout, possibly a record turnout, more than 77%, possibly. So it's a clear indication that people do want change. But do you think that, this support for the president that they have elected, do you think it's going to be for the long haul, or perhaps it could change again if they think that this new president doesn't live up to expectations?
Well, what Mr. Lee's detractors fear is that his party already has a supermajority in the parliament. And now with Mr. Lee as the next president, presumably, they have full control of the executive, the legislature, and they have also threatened to impeach the head of the Supreme Court who ruled against Mr. Lee a few weeks ago, and to increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court to 100, effectively saying they'll have a mini Democratic Party of Korea kind of group within the judiciary itself. So that kind of monopoly of power is not good for democracy in general, and people fear that Mr. Lee will be unrestrained if he becomes the next leader.
You've shared some great insights with us. Thank you so much for your time and thoughts, political analyst Lee Sung-yoon. Well, in other news, Mongolian Prime Minister Lobsang Namsai Oyun-erdin has resigned after losing a vote of confidence in parliament. Well, after the result of the vote was announced, the Mongolian Prime Minister told lawmakers it was an honor for him to serve his country and people in times of difficulties, pandemics, wars, and tariffs. Well, this resignation follows corruption claims that erupted into street protests last month. Social media photos of Mr. Oyun-erdin's son enjoying a lavish lifestyle prompted a public backlash and pushed the nation's anti-corruption agency to look into Mr. Oyun-erdin's finances. The Prime Minister's office denied those allegations. Since Oyun-erdin took power in 2021, Mongolia has plummeted in Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. Meantime, he will act as caretaker Prime Minister until his successor is appointed within 30 days. In other news, the Japanese embassy in Beijing says 2 of its citizens were killed in China over what officials say is a grudge. A Chinese suspect has been detained.
被害人为日本公民，系犯罪嫌疑人商业伙伴，因经营合作产生矛盾，引发该案。案情目前正在进一步调查中，中方有关部门将依法予以处理。
Well, the incident took place in Dalian in the northeastern Liaoning province. Embassy officials say they were informed of the case by local authorities on 25th of May, but declined to disclose more information as investigations are ongoing. NHK, citing its sources, say both male victims were killed on 23rd of May. Now, Japan says it will provide the necessary support to the victims' families, as well as take appropriate actions to protect the safety of its citizens. It's unclear why it took more than a week for the Japanese embassy to reveal the deaths. Kyodo News, citing a Japanese government source, says the incident was not politically motivated or triggered by anti-Japan sentiment. Dalian City has a notable Japanese presence, with some 1,700 companies operating there and 3,000 citizens residing there as well. Now, separate non-related incidents last year have prompted safety concerns among the Japanese community in China. Yoki Kamikawa, who was Japan's foreign minister then, had urged China to ensure the safety of its citizens. Hong Kong leader John Lee, ahead of the 4th June anniversary of the Tiananmen incident in Beijing, has warned the public not to violate the city's law. He was responding to a question from the media on whether the anniversary can be commemorated publicly.
我都喺度咧，係再提醒危害國家安全嘅行為係嚴重罪行，所以政府針對打擊危害國家安全嘅行為同埋活動咧，有法必依，執法必嚴，會追究法律責任到底。
4th of June marks 36 years since the Chinese military quashed student-led pro-democracy protests. Activists in Hong Kong had for decades held candlelight vigils in Victoria Park. But since 2020, the city banned such commemorations on grounds of preventing the spread of the coronavirus. During last year's anniversary, police ramped up their presence both in mainland China and Hong Kong over concerns of possible security threats. Coming up on East Asia tonight.
I'm Tan Sihui in San Francisco.
And I'm also in Beijing.
The gloves are off.
Find out more as I explore how the battle of the humanoids is shaping up on both sides.
Emirates President Tim Clark has steered the world's largest long-haul carrier through some of the biggest turmoils of this generation. Speaking to Yasmin Yonkers on the sidelines of a major aviation industry gathering in New Delhi, Mr. Clark says the Trump administration's tariff regime has yet to hit demand for air travel.
Until that is rebalanced to his satisfaction, there's going to be noise and activity. Is there any sign of a fall-off in demand for travel as a result of that? Not that I can see. Is it affecting freight? Is it affecting, of course, when there were 140% of the Chinese product, the freight market across the Transpac stopped. So there was an immediate effect on that. But then, once again, it came down again. So people are saying, we'll just wait and see how this pans out. It's not in America's interest to have huge tariffs on everything because of all the obvious economic reasons. But all he's doing is trying to send a message that for all these years, you have had the better card in the game. So I need to get that reset. We'll see how that works out in the end. But as I said, the resilience of demand post-COVID, and people have been through to hell and back in COVID, lockdown for months and months and months, and it's steeled them to say, I have to move, I want to move when I can, and that is still going on at the moment. I'm not saying it's a temporary thing. I'm not saying that it's going to end suddenly, but if there was a paradigm change as a result of COVID, it was the other way. Demand was kicked into a far greater level than we ever saw before. So long may it last.
Singapore's Senior Minister of State for Trade and Industry, Low Yen Ling, is urging local firms to seize emerging opportunities in China's biopharmaceuticals, green and digital sectors. She was speaking at an event organized by the Singapore-China Business Association, an organization promoting economic collaboration between the two countries.
当今呢，现在我们都面临了日益分化、日益复杂多变的地缘政治局面。全世界的经济真的是在面对前所未有的挑战。可是我觉得危机中总有契机，新中两国的企业，我觉得更需要积极的加深我们的合作，把握机遇，在危机中找到突破的这个契机，继续的为我们两国的经济带来发展。
The association says it will help firms tap on free trade agreements and promote Singapore as a business-friendly hub to attract more foreign investments. A Chinese ambassador to Singapore, Cao Zhongming, says that Singapore and China are very close partners and that in the face of mounting U.S. tariffs, China will continue to uphold global trade.
中国呢，我们坚定维护自己的利益坚决反制，也是维护国际的公平正义。那么经过反制呢，也是迫使美方认真对待中国的利益和关切。
Residents in Japan are scrambling to get a hold of lower-cost government-stockpiled rice as officials voice readiness to release more grain from warehouses as needed. Well, this comes as the country endures a year-long spike in rice prices owing to factors such as extreme heat that impacted rice production and supply.
この高止まりを放置すればおのずと棚は外国産米に埋められていく、こういったことを食い止めるために備蓄米の放出もやっているんだということを改めてお伝えをさせていただければと思います。
Long queues for cheaper rice formed over the weekend at some retailers, and that's made possible after the Japanese government began selling stockpiled rice directly to retailers, marking an abrupt change in the policy of handing the grain to distributors. The aim is to lower the cost of a 5-kilogram bag of rice to around $14. Well, that's less than half of the current average price.
やはり今までぐらい上がる前ぐらいの値段になってくれればいいかなと思って、それは小泉さんに期待してます期待するしかないやっぱり主食ですからね、食べなきゃいけないんで、だからもうやっぱお米が高い時は代替でパンとかパスタ、うどん、そういうのに変えてましたけど、やっぱりご飯が一番いいかなと思います。
Robots are fast taking over mundane tasks from humans in areas like healthcare, logistics, and services. Well, the world's superpowers, US and China, are now racing to develop the most advanced humanoid. Well, in the first of a two-part series, we look at how humanoids will shape the future and who will shape it first. CNA's Tan Sihui with this first report from China.
A half marathon between humans and robots, the first of its kind in the world, held in Beijing. While some were built for speed, others just needed a break. But at the core of it, China is hoping to showcase some of its most advanced robots in real-life scenarios, and manufacturers say it's only the beginning.
所以今天这个更多的是测试了它的这个长距离稳定奔跑的这个稳定运行的这个技术的可靠性和稳定性。下一步我们还是在真正的真实的工作场景里面去做更多的测试和迭代。
But it's more than just automation. It's a global race as tech titans are locked in a fierce battle to build the most advanced humanoid. And the race is on. The global market for humanoid robots could surpass $5 trillion by 2050, according to Morgan Stanley research. Reports have named leading humanoid manufacturers almost exclusively from two countries, China and the US. But the big question is, who will win the race? And how soon will we see these robots enter our everyday life? China's humanoids first shot to stardom early this year when they danced on the screens of millions at the Spring Festival Gala, capturing international headlines. The wheels are set in motion as China's humanoid robot manufacturers enter mass production, aiming to produce more than 1,000 units this year, with a domestic output value of about $600 million. Much of that success is owed to its well-established supply chain, government policies, and funds that help drive the robust development of robotics sector. According to official data, China had a total of 450,000 smart robotics firms by end of last year, marking a staggering more than 200% increase from 2020.
This sort of advancement and progress, it sort of reflects a mix of like public-private cooperation in China that's supported by its world-class and high-value STEM talent pool, as well as decades-long and mature manufacturing infrastructure. China's sort of growing trend of entrepreneurship and innovation in advanced technology, and I think that really facilitates a lot of innovation, a lot of developments in humanoid in China.
The momentum continued at this year's annual Zhongguancun Tech Forum, where robots were front and center. Set against the backdrop of the trade war with the US, manufacturers were keen to show off their mechanical inventions.
让我试试看从简单的地方说起。
你好，你叫什么名字呢？
你好，我叫清飞科技尼亚，中关村论坛的智能客服。
Hello, Nia. Can you speak English?
Of course, I can assist you in English. How can I help you today?
那么我们是希望在人跟人的这个交互里面，能够由它来替代我们的一些服务的一些岗位，比如说公共服务，比如说文化传播，以及包括教育和情绪陪伴。
Analysts say they're optimistic about the future for robotics in China, especially as the country faces increasing societal and geopolitical challenges.
The governments also view this humanoid development as a critical solutions for sort of structural demographic challenge, right? Including aging populations, declining fertility, and also the increasing labor costs right now in China in the context of US-China strategic competition. They believe that humanoid is a frontier technology to set it as a national priority to develop, and they believe this is a thing that they really need to compete and develop in a competition with the United States.
In the second part of a two-part series, I travel to the US to find out how the economic superpower is pushing the frontiers of humanoid development.
A Japanese baseball legend, Shigeo Nagashima, nicknamed by his fans as Mr. Pro Baseball, has died at the age of 89. Nagashima played for the Yomiuri Giants, winning 9 straight Japan Series titles from 1965 to 1973. Together with world home run record holder Sadaharu Oh, the pair cemented baseball's status as Japan's favorite sport. Nagashima and Oh's exploits captivated a Japanese audience that was seeking entertainment after the devastation of World War II. Nagashima's outsized personality and charisma made him the image of confidence. He famously hit a walk-off home run to seal a win for the Giants in the first professional game ever attended by Japan's emperor in 1959. Tributes have been pouring in from the world of baseball. Los Angeles Dodgers superstar Shohei Ohtani posted a photo of himself with Nagashima on social media and wrote, "May your soul rest in peace." And that's East Asia Tonight this Tuesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.